Hey, it's Scene World. Welcome to the podcast. I'm AJ. He's Joerg.
Yes, hello everybody.
In a minute, we have 3D realms. Well, Joerg and Andrew have 3D realms.
And Slipgate.
Yes.
2-in-1.
I'll be out on assignment. I'm just here to do the intro.
Nice.
Before
At least
that,
one job left for you.
yeah. There's something for me left to do here. In a minute. Oh, well, I said that already. Before we do that, though, a little bit of news. This just came through, actually. I just saw this before, that Sega has halted games of its of a game. Judgment is the name of the game. It's a Sega game, and they've stopped sales of the game in Japan after an actor that appears in the game was arrested for drug use.
Okay. That is not the first time this happened. I mean, there is Sonic 3, and after the allegations of Michael Jackson, they pulled all the music he did for the game.
Okay.
And scratched that and had another composer doing the music. So it's not the first time in history that does that. There's a whole video on YouTube about that, how Michael Jackson was involved originally in the Sonic 3 music,
right?
But then it got pulled.
I can understand that. That's kind of bad PR. This guy was just an actor in the game, and he got caught with some cocaine, and so they've halted all sales, and not only halted all sales in Japan, they've also they've refrained from shipments and digital sales, and they've also deleted all the marketing tweets about the game.
Wow.
For the guy, he was arrested for possessing a small amount of cocaine. And he plays a gangster in the game. So it actually goes along with the character he's playing in the game almost, you know?
Weird.
Yeah. I think that's a little bit of a heavy penalty. Personally, I'm for all drug use, but I guess in Japan, there's a heavy. It's very, very hard line against drugs, and I guess it carries up to a 7-year prison sentence for having any cocaine on you. So,
wow.
So that's what I got there.
Interesting. Yeah. So in the last interview podcast, we actually spoke with Chris Bateman, or I spoke with Chris Bateman about his RPG called Silk, and this time we will include some video so you can see what it's like to play it. As this was an audio interview only, and we spoke about the special kind of graphics that were used. It's like looking like a comic hand-drawn kind of adventure. I guess since I explained this now, you can see it while I explain it.
Okay.
Right. And I also got some video footage of an unofficial demo of Alien Escape, which is a game that we spoke about last intro. That means you escape riddles and stuff by turning the environment while the character is moving. So you will see footage of that here as well.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, did we get anything else? Anything further?
That's what I got. That's all.
Wow. That's probably the shortest news item bit we ever had. So, don't know. Enjoy the interview, guys.
Yeah. There they are. They're over there. I'm going to jump out and let Andrew come in and take my seat. Yeah. Although he may also redecorate the room a little bit. I don't know.
While we talk to Frederik Schreiber and Mike Nielsen. See ya in a few seconds. Bye-bye.
There you go.
Welcome again to the podcast, guys. interestingly, we spoke like 4 years ago already, and there we spoke about the history of 3D Realms, and I mentioned back then that it would be nice to have a successor to Commander Keen, as this was one of the games I played when I was like 10, 11 years old on a PC, and I remember you told me you had such a thing in mind, but you couldn't tell us because it was still a secret.
Yeah.
And so then you released Rad Rodgers on PC and on other platforms and over a Kickstarter. And now you actually have released on the 26th of February a physical release for the Switch.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that. I mean,
sure.
How did that happen to be?
So actually a year ago, almost exactly, I think it was the 28th of February last year, we released the Xbox One and the PS4 versions of Rad Rodgers physically. And that year in between, we started working on kind of the extra stuff we wanted to add to Rad Rodgers that we didn't have the opportunity to do originally. Stuff like that would, for instance, be co-op, more playable characters, more levels, mini games, and so on. So we worked together with THQ on a new deal that could add all this new content, and then we would release that for the Nintendo Switch and a free update for all existing customers for PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. And yeah, that was actually finished up back in October last year. We finished that version of, yeah, you have it right there. Awesome.
Exactly, yes.
So that was actually done in October last year, but mainly due to positioning and when is a good time to release certain video games, it was pushed to February this year. So in between October last year and February, we basically just been tweaking and polishing. We had an extra roughly 6 months there to polish and tweak up the game. And yeah, that's basically how it came together. We didn't get to add Commander Keen to the game. There are some Easter eggs around the game that kind of hint towards Commander Keen. You can find a pogo stick in the game somewhere. You can find his plasma gun. We really wanted to have Commander Keen in the game, but the Keen IP is a very tricky IP to work with, especially since it's partly owned by both Bethesda and the original creator Tom Hall, and as far as we know, there hasn't been any solution to that. I think also mostly because no one has really dived into the IP and tried making something new. Commander Keen, regardless of how much we like the character and the IP, it's not well known amongst regular gamers these days. So I don't think there's a lot of value in bringing a true Commander Keen game back. But we did our best with what we could without stepping into someone else's territory. So the Easter eggs is what you're gonna get. On the other hand, we have Nukem in the game, and we have Lo Wang, and we have Bombshell, we have Cosmo. So there's a ton of other cool characters.
Yeah, so how did you pick those additional characters? Was it just working with the 3D Realms roster, or did you want to expand that further?
Well, we owned a few IPs still at 3D Realms. One of them is Cosmo. So obviously we looked into, okay, what do we already own? What can we actually work with at 3D Realms? Back in the day, most of the IP that 3D Realms were developing was actually owned by the individual people making the games. So games like Wacky Wheels and Halloween Harry and Blake Stone and so on, they're all owned by the creators of each of these games. 3D Realms didn't actually own that many IPs back in the day, and still to this day, but one of them was Cosmo, which was the very first internally developed game at Apogee, besides the older games that Scott Miller did himself. But the first internally developed game at Apogee was the first Cosmo game, actually built on the Commander Keen engine. So we had Cosmo, and we have, I would say, a pretty good relationship with Devolver. So we reached out and asked them, hey, how about Lo Wang? And they were instantly on board. The hard one to pull was Duke Nukem. That is what 3D Realms is mostly known for. still a very popular character, and he started his adventures in a side scroller, both Duke Nukem 1 and Duke Nukem 2. So it would be fantastic to bring him back to his side scrolling roots. For that we reached out to Gearbox and we just asked them, hey, would you guys like to participate in this? We'd love to use the character as a playable character in this game and so on. And they were pretty much on board right away, which was a big surprise to us, but we're really happy that we were allowed to bring him back. And we also had almost, I would say, complete creative freedom of how we'd like to make him look and design him and so on. So
it was, at least I felt from my perspective that it was actually a big pleasure dealing with him, despite our disagreements in the past. I think we can safely say that is all behind us. We're now doing business and best friends. Best friends, good friends, at least.
Absolutely.
So we're getting along really well, is what I would say. So yes.
It's actually interesting because you mentioned we met 2 years ago at Gamescom, and we had an appointment at THQ Nordic to talk about the progress of Equinox. On the same day, you had an appointment with them making the deal to publish, Rad Rodgers. And I wonder, because Rad Rodgers is also published by THQ Nordic, as well as Gianna Sister's Twisted Dreams on the Switch is also published by THQ Nordic. Isn't that kind of a conflict of interest to have two competition games published by the same publisher? Or did nobody of you mind?
Usually, I would say, but you have to keep in mind THQ has over 100 studios these days. And they have grown so big that they have divided their different IPs into different sub-publishing companies. For instance, right now, the Rad Rodgers IP is under Handy Games, which is another publisher owned by THQ. So they're kind of trying to divide these games into different smaller publishing houses to kind of avoid competing with themselves. But they will have to do that, unfortunately, since they have grown so large right now. For instance, Deep Silver is also owned by THQ. So whenever they release a shooter and THQ themselves release a shooter, that might happen at the same time as well. Luckily, games are not, I would say, when you have games in this price category, smaller indie games, less than $30, I don't think it's that big of an issue. I think if we had two very similar games, both $60 games, and most of the audience for that game would only buy one of them with their budget, I think it's a bigger issue. But a game like Rad Rodgers is relatively cheap. A game like Gianna Sisters is also relatively cheap. So I think those people who like those kind of games will most likely get both. And if they don't get both at launch, maybe they'll get one at launch, the other the month after. I don't think it matters that much. When you're this big, you can't really avoid that.
Will it be a limited edition? Because some shops, like Cool Shop, for example, list it as a limited edition. But is it a limited edition, like the Kickstarter original PC release?
That's not at least what we've heard. I did see that. I think it's a mistake, and I reached out to them, but I don't think they picked up on it. I did notice that they put a limited edition on it. I think that's because it's Radical Edition. They're calling it a limited edition, but that's I think their product team probably misunderstood something. I don't know. Maybe you can clarify that for me, Fred. But I have no idea. I'm pretty sure there's no limited edition going on here.
Yeah. I think Cool Shop probably just calls products like collector's edition, limited edition, like it's probably in the same category.
Yeah.
And this is not a collector's edition. This could have been just called Rad Rodgers for Switch, but we wanted to have some kind of subtitle that would hint of all the new content that we added. So we just decided to call it Radical Edition. We thought that was pretty fitting.
I wonder, did you also change other things? I mean, if you look at the critics of the original version, people were criticizing that the game wasn't very easy, even in the easy mode, and that there were some graphical glitches in it and such things. And level design was confusing. So did you change anything in the Radical edition about that?
Well, the Radical edition has not changed in difficulty. We still have the same difficulty modes. Obviously, easy mode, you have unlimited lives on easy mode. So even if it's hard, it shouldn't be too hard for most. I know both Mike's kids and my daughter. They're very small, very young, and they play the game just fine. So it's not that hard, I'd say. And with on easy mode with unlimited lives, you can just keep trying until you get through it. You're not really punished for dying.
But you have included mini games like pinball and pogo stick, as you mentioned earlier, which would be like a spoiler, I guess. And I wonder, you had the problem with Bombshell, that was your earlier IP, that people expected Duke Nukem, and it didn't appear to be Duke Nukem, so it didn't get so much favorable reviews. And didn't you fear that the same would happen with Rad Rodgers, that people expect like Commander Keen and there's no Commander Keen character in it? And then that is why people would be disappointed yet again?
Not really. The game Rad Rodgers was never marketed as anything like Commander Keen. Bombshell was actually originally revealed and teased as a Duke Nukem game. And that's a large part of why people knew and thought it was a Duke game, because we actually had a teaser page up and running where we teased, okay, there's a new Duke Nukem game coming, and then a few months later we announced it as, okay, it's Bombshell. Also during the lawsuit, it was revealed that it was a Duke game that we changed into a Bombshell game. So I understand why people expected that. This case, we never had any association with Commander Keen. We never marketed the game towards the Commander Keen audience. Actually, the game was kind of a spiritual successor to an old Amiga game called Rough and Tumble. That's the game we really wanted to make. We wanted to make a sequel to Rough and Tumble. Yeah, the Rough and Tumble IP is such an old IP, and it's back from the day where individual people owned the IP, and nowadays the people who worked on that game originally are not even in the games industry anymore. So no one really knows who owns what and what's happened to the IP. So what we decided to do was, okay, let's make a spiritual successor to Rough and Tumble. Let's call it something different, different name, different character, but rooted in the same base gameplay as Rough and Tumble. So if you liked the old obscure platformer called Rough and Tumble for Amiga, you'll like this. We had Easter eggs in there for Commander Keen, but you wouldn't know unless you actually played through the game. So I wouldn't say people were expecting this to be a Commander Keen game.
Oh, so that's interesting, because Retro Gamer recently ran a feature on Rough and Tumble, talking to its creator Jason Perkins. So, Mike, what would you say were the sort of key features from those 1990s platformers that you wanted to get into Rad Rodgers?
Actually, I think I'm not the big game design guy. I'm mostly on the business, so I think Fred can probably talk more about that. But I just personally, I like those kind of the mechanics that we got into Rad Rodgers. It's a game I've been playing quite a lot since it released, and I've been playing it again now on the Switch and also during development. But now that it's out and it's done, trying to teach my kids, both my kids, how to platform and at a young age, So yeah, but Fred can probably talk more about the technical terms and all those things. He being the game lead and lead designer on it. So
sure, I think the main gameplay formula in Rad Rodgers is very similar to the classic Apogee DOS games. What we specifically liked about those compared to the main competitor, Super Mario, Sonic, and so on, was the fact that the levels in a game like Cosmo, Duke Nukem 2, Hocus Pocus, and so on and so forth, were often very large levels with many different paths. So, for instance, you would find a door which needed a key, and then you could take another path to find that key and go back, open the door, and so on and so on. So that type of level design, we really liked and missed in modern shooters. Another game, Jackrabbit, Jail of the Jungle, also used the same base mechanics. Very different from a game like, for instance, Super Mario Bros. Or Sonic. That's the kind of game we wanted to bring back, the kind of gameplay we wanted to bring back with Rad Rodgers. We really missed that. So that also meant the levels became very large with many different paths, many different options to get to different places. We like to call the levels kind of like open world. In some, like each level, you can go almost wherever you want. The first few levels are pretty linear, but then they open up more and more. And then at some point, when you reach level 3, for instance, you can go either left, right, up, or down from the beginning and just decide, okay, which sections of the level do I want to deal with first to gain access to all the sections and so on.
I see. So is there a lot of hidden areas and interesting features to find then?
Yes, there's a ton. We love secret areas. I think every game we do has tons of secrets. Easter eggs and so on. Rad Rodgers is one of them. We have the score counter at the end of each level that basically counts how many secrets have you found out of how many enemies have you killed, gems picked up, and so on, and you get a score out of that. But the secrets are many, plentiful, and they are very well hidden, some of them at least. There is one secret we haven't seen anyone find yet, which is an homage to Duke Nukem 2. It's actually a secret level. We haven't seen anyone find it, and it's very hard to find, but we're looking forward to that.
Well, that's a task for you, Professor Andrew.
That's a job.
I mean, recently there were some reviews from the press about the Radical Edition, and many of them wrote, like, it's a very cool game if you are into those kind of games and if you like Commander Keen and Sisters and so on, but maybe it's not an easy entry for young gamers that never have touched the 80s and 90s original releases. Is that what you think too, or do you think that the critics are missing out some things?
No, I kind of agree. The demographic for the game is not specifically kids. The game has a lot of violence, has a lot of adult humor, and the game was based on those, 3D Realms values, if you can call it that. It is a very adult game. I think back when we developed it, we kind of compared it to the same humor that you'd see in a series like Rick and Morty, for instance, or South Park, which from the outside looks like it's for kids because it's cartoony and colorful, while it's really not. We added a kiddie mode to the game and a censorship mode, but the core demographic are probably 30-plus-year-old guys like us who played classic platformers back in the day. So I think the reviewers who don't necessarily have fond memories of those type of games might not understand exactly why we think this is so great. And we can clearly see that in reviews. I compiled a list of all the reviews of the new version here, and we have quite a few 9 out of 10s. We have some 8 out of 10s, some 7 out of 10s, and then there's 2 or 3 5 out of 10s. And when you read the reviews, they say pretty much the same things. But for one person, the elements of the games are stuff he likes, and it's the exact same elements that the 5 out of 10 hates. So it would be like, I love the humor in the game, and another one would be, I hate the humor in the game. I love the platforming and the difficulty. I hate the platforming and the difficulty. So it's the same things that people like and dislike for some weird reason. But I think it's because it's for guys like us, guys who grew up playing these games, who loves a good challenge and who loves to play games where you actually have to think a little bit for yourself.
That's interesting. Humor in games can be very subjective. It can either put you off or it can draw you in, particularly with dialogue. And that is something that's difficult to get the balance right. I mean, in terms of that, did you use a writer, or was it the team themselves that together?
Well, maybe we made the mistake of not using a writer for Rad Rodgers. We had one for Bombshell, and for Rad Rodgers, I think we thought we had such a great sense of humor that we would be the perfect writers for this. Maybe that was a mistake because it's very childish humor, I'd say, at the office. So there's a lot of fart jokes in the game. But again, it also fits really well with the 90s setting and theme in the game. It's very tongue-in-cheek, it's very cheesy. So we thought, hey, this might actually be funny. And some people think it's funny, some don't think it's that funny. It's subjective, as you say.
So, I mean, the original designers, for example, co-designer was John Romero, who also did Duke Nukem. Who did Doom and Quake, and he said that he made the graphics, especially on the later Commander Keen, to look like VGA graphics, very colorful and popping, despite it was still the EGA 16 colors palette, and it appeared more colorful. And then there was Bobby Prince, who did this childish music. Yeah. But when I played Rad Rodgers, I figured while the graphics are very colorful and the enemies are very colorful, the music sometimes changes. I mean, there are sometimes like orchestra pieces, then there are happy pieces, and then there are more speed up music pieces. So you didn't really have a steady style in the music of the game, at least to my impression when I played through the first 3 levels.
I would say the style is pretty consistent. It's synthwave in general, but again, the genre of synthwave music is so wide. So you can have hardcore synthwave, you can have happy synthwave, and so on. But the style itself is mainly synthwave. Something that we could have done would have been to do what Bobby Prince did back in the day and do very happy, colorful music. That could have been hilarious, I think, especially with all the gore and carnage going on. But for this game, we decided to try something else. We were all big fans of synthwave music at the office, and our composer Andrew, who's been doing primarily heavy metal previously in our previous games, really wanted to do the challenge as well, trying to dive into a completely new and fresh genre. And we think it did a pretty good job. It's maybe not as melodic as the music you remember back in the days, but again, back then you only had MIDI and you only had so few channels to work with, which is one of the main reasons the music in early 90s games and late 80s games were so melodic, because with so few channels you have to get as much out of it as possible. So it has to be melodic, it has to have some kind of tune, where nowadays you can create soundscapes and ambience and so on that you couldn't do back then.
That's interesting. So from a technical point of view then, how easy has it been to work with the Switch? Are you working on your own engine, or are you using middleware like Unity?
Sure. So the Switch itself is actually very easy to develop for, much easier than most people realize. It's a pleasure, since the Switch is basically built with an NVIDIA chip and x68 CPU architecture. So it's very, very close to a PC.
I think it's called Tega or something.
NVIDIA Tegra.
Tegra was it?
That's in the Switch. So it's very easy to develop for, and the Nintendo platform especially has very few limitations in terms of how easy it is to actually port games compared to Xbox and the PlayStation, who they both do some very weird stuff every now and then that you have to take into account. So in terms of porting and working with the Switch, it's a pleasure. I think everyone who works with the Switch will agree to that. What's not so pleasurable is the fact that the Switch is, of course, way less powerful than the Xbox and PlayStation. So for the Switch, getting a game to run is fairly easy, but getting a game to perform well is the big challenge. And we spent the better half of a year trying to cram a game like Bombshell that was made for high-end PCs using Unreal Engine 4 down to the Switch without compromising too much on the graphics. So what we did was we first of all analyzed, okay, where's the biggest bottleneck? Why does the game run slowly? Obviously, it's a huge UE4 game with tons of details, but which details can we tone down, and what details can we sacrifice without sacrificing the entire look of the game? So, for instance, we took a lot of the background elements, turned them into flat planes rather than 3D objects, because it is a side scroller. So yeah, you can maybe spot that some of these are now 2D objects rather than full 3D models, but it doesn't really change the overall visuals of the game. We also added level of details, which are called LODs. Basically, it changes the density of the polygons of the models depending on how far away they are from the screen. So whenever the camera zooms out a bit, the polygon count of each model is way lower than when the camera is closer to the characters. So all of that combined with a ton of code tweaks and a ton of code that was translated into machine code, C++ code, made the game perform really well on the Switch. So we like to believe that we got a game on the Switch right now that looks and compares very well to the other platforms. We're really happy with that.
And did you have much room left on the Switch cartridge?
So there are actually two Switch cartridges. There's a 4 GB and an 8 GB. And whenever you do retail for Switch, most publishers or distributors would like to do the 4 GB cartridge because it's much cheaper than the 8 GB cartridge. And especially when you're pricing your game, if you're buying or if you're producing a 4 GB cartridge, which is much cheaper than the 8 GB cartridge, you have less production costs per unit that gets in the store, which means that you can sell the game for less, which is a good benefit for us because this is a game it's not a $60 game. And if we sold it for $60 or $40, people would just buy the PC version instead, or the Xbox version or PlayStation version. So we actually got it down to, I think, 3.8 or 3.9 gigabytes. So it just barely fits the platform. But we managed to get it small enough so we could fit it on a 4 GB cartridge.
I want to add a few things to this cartridge thing, because actually Nintendo, it was revealed that Nintendo actually is planning to release 16 GB game cartridges this month, so that newer games wouldn't have to have 8 GB of download like Wolfenstein 2 and 8 GB on the game card. What Panic Button did, because Wolfenstein 2 was too big to actually have it on an 8 GB game card. So that means that from this month on, there can be bigger games on the Switch.
And I think it all challenges that patches themselves and updates can only be 500 megabytes. That's another weird limit they have. I guess someone as big as Bethesda can probably tell Nintendo, you know what, you're not getting Wolfenstein unless we can do an 8 GB patch. But otherwise, the rules are you can't do more than 500 megabytes patch, which makes it really hard to do certain things with it. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that they're actually doing 16 GB cards now. Like a game like, let's say they wanted Red Dead Redemption, that's a 100 GB game. How the hell would they fit that? It can't even fit on the memory in the actual Switch. So,
and with the slow Wi-Fi model in the Switch, you would need 3 days for downloading.
Exactly.
Right. So, in the terms of scaling down the game to make it fast enough, but still visibly appealing on the Switch, is basically what Panic Button did for Doom and Wolfenstein 2. Because that is what they did. They scaled down. Did you also scale down on the resolution of the game?
Yeah. So the game itself runs at lower than 720p and is then upscaled, except for UI elements. I think most games, even Doom, Wolfenstein, and so on, runs at a lower resolution than native, and then they upscale certain parts. Most games look great enough. If you lower the resolution but use anti-aliasing very cleverly, you can get results on a small screen that actually looks very comparable to native 720p. The bigger challenge comes when you are in docking mode, when you actually have to play it on a big screen, because then you can see all of the little blurry details. A game like Doom for the Switch is not pretty on a TV, but that's also not the main point of the game, is it, for Switch? What's attractive about Doom for the Switch is that you can play Doom on the train, in the airplane, not playing it at home on your big TV. There are probably other solutions that are much better for a game like that.
Exactly. Talking about the Switch support, as from the press view, when I was in the business area of Gamescom 2017 and had publisher interviews and coder interviews, they said in 2017 we are ignoring the Switch because it's too hard to develop for it and it's too weak. And then last year in August, when we were at Gamescom again, the same publisher said, like, yes, of course the new game is coming out to Switch. So there is a 180-degree turn compared to the first year Switch was released to last year, and even now they are releasing games that were thought to be impossible on the Switch. So
it's just been the Switch's second birthday, and there's now over 1,000 games available from it, from small indie titles to the big ports, and Doom and Wolfenstein, as we've mentioned here, and Skyrim being another example of a game that you would associate with PC but has been successfully scaled over to the Switch. So there does seem to have been an opinion change on that, and it's good to see games like Rad Rodgers have also found a place on Switch.
And absolutely, yeah. I think that's something people often get wrong about Nintendo. Whenever Nintendo releases a console, besides possibly the Wii U, it's been immensely successful. And every time it comes out, people are very doubtful that this console will ever be anything. Like, look at the Wii when that came out, compared to something like the PS3 and Xbox 360. And yet Nintendo somehow knows that this thing will latch on. I would like to call the Wii U kind of a prototype Switch, a very fat prototype Switch. But I completely understand why people have changed their minds about it, because it is a fantastic console, and playing modern AAA games on a handheld platform is there's just something magical about it. So I'm really happy that Nintendo has managed yet again to create a fantastic console.
May I ask, why did you actually decide for publishing with THQ Nordic? I mean, you could publish yourself. I mean, you have 3D Realms, you have, I think it's called Slipgate Studios, right? Yeah.
So it's actually not that easy to publish yourself. Everyone can self-publish online. It's pretty straightforward. But for a game like this, especially when you do console, the retail market is not to be underestimated. And going retail requires that you have a certain amount of distribution partners who actually trust you and will take your game out in GameStops, Walmarts, Targets, and so on. THQ has a big distribution network, and it's also not up to us who we want as a partner. We have to find a partner who would like to work with us, and THQ was one of them. We have actually talked about doing retail self-publishing, but it does require a lot of work setting up a proper network and selling specific titles to specific distribution partners. But it's something that we'd like to do possibly in the future sometime.
The old world has passed away. Amidst the ruins lurks an ageless fear. It sees you, Outlander. You will not survive.
in our second part today, we want to talk about the two, as you would say, kick-ass action games you announced. And one would be Iron Maiden, and the other one would be Wrath, I think it's called.
Absolutely. So Iron Maiden, we actually started working on that. When was it? I think 2015. Quite some time ago. We wanted to do a prequel to Bombshell before Bombshell was actually done, and originally it was supposed to be not a DLC or expansion to Bombshell, but a side product to Bombshell to kind of explain her backstory. And we thought, hey, since this is gonna explain her backstory, wouldn't it be cool to actually have it be built in the same technology as, back in the 90s, because the game takes place, several years ago. So we started working on a concept for this, and we wanted to put together a team of enthusiasts, build engine enthusiasts, people who've been working with this old Duke Nukem 3D engine for decades. We got in touch with a ton of Duke Nukem 3D community members, people still mapping for Duke Nukem 3D and Shadow Warrior and so on, and Void Point, which is two guys who made the official source port of Duke 3D. There are several, but the most well-known source port is called eDuke 32. So the developers of this source port, if we wanted anyone who knew build engine then better than anyone, it would have to be those guys. So we got a hold of all these guys and started putting together a team that could work on this game. This is way back in 2015, before Bombshell came out. And we started working together with this group of people on a concept. Okay, what should the game be about? Where should it be located? What should the levels be about? The weapons and so on and so on. And then right around the time when Bombshell was about to be released, we kind of took our hands off this project. We had a lot of stuff to do with the Bombshell release, making sure that all of this went smooth. It was our next big game after Rise of the Triad. So the team was kind of left on their own to develop this little build engine game. And then, I'd say a year later, we kind of went back in and started helping them out again to see, okay, how far are you guys? What's the progress and so on. And at this point, unfortunately, Bombshell didn't do as well as we hoped for. There was a lot of day one issues and so on that we've still, we learned a ton from our mistakes, and the reviews also reflect that. But we started looking back at Iron Maiden, and this game actually turned out at this point to be very, very promising. Not only do these people have a lot of experience working with the build engine, doing just fan mods and maps for a decade or two, now they actually get to do their first real game from scratch using this engine that they know and love so dearly. So when we saw what was going on with the project and how well it actually turned out, we were really excited, and we decided basically to go all in on Iron Maiden. In February last year, almost exactly a year ago, we announced Iron Maiden. We went to PAX East 2018 with it, and we also, alongside the announcement, we announced that you could actually buy it and play it right now. So if you pre-order the game, you'd get this special preview campaign that would take place in the Iron Maiden universe. It's not a campaign that's necessarily in the final game. We might include it as a separate thing, but it's not like here are the first 3 levels of the final game. It was more like a custom-made mini campaign to give you kind of an experience of what to expect from a game like Iron Maiden. So that's basically what happened. The press for the game was fantastic. It got one of the highest rated games on Steam. Tremendous amount of positive reactions and feedback. So the team has been hard at work since the reveal last year on making sure the game becomes as good as possible. So we're really, really proud with those guys.
And also, you renamed your studio name.
Yeah, after Bombshell, we had another project in development called Rad Rodgers, which we released in, I think it was January 2017. And when that game was released, we had basically run out of money. Like we continued working on that game until the very last day, so it could become as good as possible. We released the game and we shut down. And during the following few months, we worked with several co-publishers and investors and so on to see if we could find a solution to get the studio back up and running. And meanwhile, everyone else from the team was waiting patiently to see, okay, what's going to happen here? Is Rad Rodgers going to be a huge hit? Is this going to save our studio and so on? Because the blow of Bombshell not being as good as we hoped for, or selling as well as we hoped for, besides being ridiculously expensive to produce, really took a toll on Intercept Entertainment. And if Rad Rodgers wasn't going to be a huge hit, we had to close doors. Fortunately, we made a deal with THQ Nordic. They acquired the IP and invested heavily in Rad Rodgers, which meant that we could now start up the studio again, which we did. And when we did that, we scaled down tremendously because we were not going to make a new game. We were going to continue working on Rad Rodgers, but make a few more levels, new features, port it to Xbox and PlayStation, and then later, of course, Nintendo Switch, and add new characters, modes, and so on. So we didn't need all the people that you'd need to make a full-scale production. So we scaled down a lot, and then we thought, you know what? The Intercept Entertainment name was something that we came up with in a matter of an hour back in 2010 when we were just a little mod group doing a Duke Nukem Reloaded mod for Unreal Engine 3. It was never really thought through, is this name even cool? It sounds, I don't know. But we saw this as an opportunity to actually do a real name. Like, okay, it's a new studio. It's still the old studio, the same guys and so on. But now we're starting fresh. Let's come up with a name we're actually happy with. So we came up with Slipgate Studios. And we started working on Rad Rodgers. We moved into new office spaces and then slowly grew our business from there. Besides being the co-owners of 3D Realms as well, we also grew that business. 3D Realms is primarily publishing and producing, while Slipgate is developing. We've been Slipgate Studios now for almost 2 years. And we're doing pretty good, I'd say. We're developing, co-developing both Iron Maiden on other platforms, consoles, and of course Wrath is also being co-developed by Slipgate Studios, alongside other smaller tasks that we're doing for other studios. We have a really close partnership with 1C and some of their published titles. A game like Ancestors Legacy for the real-time strategy game Ancestors Legacy, we're porting that to PlayStation 4 currently. We're working on a larger game called Devil's Hunt, which is coming out for all platforms. We're doing the Xbox One, PS4, and Switch version for that. So there's a lot of different things out there that we take in as side projects, kind of to keep the ship afloat while we're working on our own major projects. So right now the big internal game at our studio is Wrath. It's 100% developed internally. That's our next internal game after Rad Rodgers, you could say.
So just to summarize it, that means Iron Maiden is a Duke Nukem 3D engine game that is basically community driven.
But basically, yeah. So you have Voidpoint, which is these two guys who did the source port for Duke Nukem 3D called eDuke 32, and it's basically them that we have this contract with. They are the studio developing the game, and the people working on the game are different talent from the community. All of them have in common that they are part of the Duke Nukem 3D community. They love Duke 3D, grew up with it, and they would all love to work on a game like this.
Yeah, and so
oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say part of part of what you've promised for Iron Maiden is that it will be fully moddable, that you'll be encouraging mods and including the tools to work with.
Yeah, so right now the whole game
is that complicated for a studio to do that?
Not really, because the way that a game like Iron Maiden is made is basically using those mod tools that everyone else is using right now. You could say that Shadow Warrior is a mod for Duke 3D. You replace all the assets, all the graphics, all the weapon animations, all the sounds, and you tweak all the values, and you replace all the levels, and now you have a new game that's fundamentally based on the same engine. You could also say that every single UE4 game is a mod for UE4, and so on. So the actual tools that I use to develop Iron Maiden are already available. Anyone can download Maps.32, which is the Void Point version of the build editor that they released ages ago. Anyone can go download that right now and make a map for Iron Maiden. They don't have the textures from Iron Maiden, obviously, because we haven't released the full game yet. They don't have the sprites and the entities and so on, but they can make a map right now in Maps.32, and then when Iron Maiden is fully released, they can just load that map up in the Iron Maiden editor and then put in all the textures and the sprites and the entities and scripts and so on that they want, and then they have a map. So they can get already now, before the game is out, they can get along like pretty far. They can build all the basic geometry, for instance.
Interesting.
It's interesting. And having read quite a bit about the build engine recently, are there any particular advantages or disadvantages that engine gives you?
Yeah, so the build engine was a very strange engine because it was kind of in between old 2D, 2.5D engines like Wolfenstein 3D, the first engine used in Doom, and then, of course, first full 3D engines, something like the Quake engine, which used what's called BSP. And this was kind of in between. It was not full 3D. You couldn't have one room over another room. You also couldn't, you could mouse look around the environment, but whenever you looked up and down, you couldn't have you could only have 90-degree angles, which meant that if you looked up and down, everything would get this kind of morph view. So since the standard for 3D engines hadn't really been developed yet, the 3D engine race was all about how do we create the most efficient engine that can run on the hardware we have available while still looking 3D. So what the build engine does really well is that everything in the build engine is real time. Nowadays, and since Quake, whenever you build something, it has to be compiled. Whenever you do lighting, it has to be compiled and baked into light maps, which is another set of textures that takes care of shadows and light. Everything has to be compiled, which takes a long time. The build engine was 100% real time, which meant that whenever you build a level in build, you do it in real time. You start in this square room and you're seeing the level in first person view, and then you have a crosshair, and wherever you put that crosshair, you can do whatever. If you put the crosshair to the ceiling and press page up, the ceiling will go up, and if you press page down, the ceiling will go down. It's all in real time. And then you can go into this 2D view where you can press the space bar to basically create little rooms with like lines in between and so on. So making levels for build initially is super easy, very straightforward, and iteration times are almost instant because what you see is what you get. At any time, you can just jump in and play around. So it's all real time, and iteration is in real time. There's no compiling, there's no rendering. It's all real time, which also allows you to do some crazy cool stuff. Something that Quake, for instance, never had was like real time moving ceilings and floors and like all these real time moving things that Duke 3D had. All the interactivity in Duke 3D, like you had a skyscraper collapsing in real time in the red light district, for instance. You couldn't do that in any other engine because everything was 3D. Unfortunately, you couldn't do a ton of things that Quake engine could do. You didn't have full 3D models, for instance. You didn't have a real 3D game. You didn't have room over room. So some advantages, some disadvantages. It is a very unique engine to work with, and it's a ton of fun. But yeah, so these guys working with this absolutely love it, simply because they grew up with it, and we thought that supporting this idea of doing it in build engine, once we found out it was actually possible, was a really good decision from our end.
Wonderful. So talking about the next 3D game is actually Wrath, and as I understood, I'm not sure if I understood it correctly, but I read that it's actually based on the Quake engine, and it will support Voodoo 2 3DFX. Is that true?
Well,
or is that
the Voodoo 2 thing was kind of a joke, but it's in line with the narrative of this being, released in the mid-90s, just as with Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden doesn't run on DOS, but it is using Build Engine, which originally was on DOS. This doesn't run on a Voodoo 2, even though it's made in that engine that was running on Voodoo 2 back in the day. But regardless, we decided, okay, let's try and make the next game now in full 3D. Like we have kind of created this alternate timeline of 3D Realms where Duke Nukem never existed, Max Payne never existed. Like we're back in '96 and we just released our Duke Nukem 3D, which is now Iron Maiden. It's a different protagonist and so on, and it might as well have been like the Bombshell IP and trademark was registered way back before Duke 3D was actually released. Might have been a Bombshell game we could have seen back in the 90s. Anyway, so this alternate timeline, what's the next thing? It's obviously 3D. And we kind of played along with this narrative of we just discovered that John Carmack made a 3D engine and they're making a game called Quake, and we better license that engine from them so we can make a really cool game. So instead of now doing Shadow Warrior as 3D Realms did back in the day, we're now doing Wrath. And Wrath is a full 3D game. Just as with Iron Maiden, we had this idea of we wanted to do a 3D game. We wanted to do it in the Quake engine, but it had to, again, use all the same limitations. It had to be a true old school shooter. We didn't want to make a game that tried to imitate what was great about the 90s. And then do it in Unity, Unreal Engine, whatever. We wanted to make something that was true to itself and authentic, and then of course didn't only match what those games were like in the 90s, but did a lot of things better because we have 20-year plus more experience now in game design and so on than we did back then. So with this game, we wanted to find, again, as with Iron Maiden, the people who were still making maps for Quake and was still playing Quake and still speedrunning Quake and still coding for Quake. So we actually started looking around the Quake community to see if we could find some really good talent that we could hire at 3D Realms to help us work on this secret project. And during that, we actually found a guy who was working on his own little project in the Quake engine. And this game was called Wrath, and no one really noticed it or knew much about it. He had a few screenshots of it. It's like it looked like a mod. Here's a mod for a Quake with a new weapon and a new environment, but it really showed promise. So when I saw this, I thought, wow, well, this looks almost exactly like what we want to do. Let's try and get in touch with him. So I reached out to this guy, Jeremiah Fox. His nickname was Killpixel, and we had a long talk about his ideas for what is it actually you're making here, and what's the story, what's the premise, and so on. And it just aligned 100% with what we wanted to do. But he was just one guy, and he had a friend that he was working with who was programming for it. And they've been working on this for years and years. And so my idea with this was to offer him, hey, why, instead of us making our own game that feels and looks pretty much exactly like what you're doing, let's team up and let us make your dream game, because you with the promise this shows, the amount of detail you've put in, the amount of thought, the care, the handcrafted models and textures and all this. If you're going to finish this by yourself, it's going to take a decade from now. If you actually want this product out, and if you want to release a game, in this lifetime, we should team up. So what we did was we basically took our internal team, and then we reached out to what we would consider our dream team of Quake mappers and modelers and people who still work with the Quake engine, again, in the community. Jeremiah Killpixel had a list of, okay, this is what his dream team would be like, and that was also a list of, John Romero, Level Lord, I told him, put together a list of the dream team, no limitations, whoever it is, both from communities and industry legends and so on. Let's get the total list of what would the ultimate ultimate team look like for a spiritual successor to Quake? And then based on that list, I will try and see who we can actually get on board. And we got surprisingly close to the list. We don't have John Romero on board, but we got surprisingly close to who we actually wanted to hire at 3D Realms to help us make this game.
Bobby Prince for the music.
Bobby Prince. Well, see, that's another thing. Some people who made music back in the day are not. They're still making music today, but so much happened with technology in terms of making music. For Quake, it was 9 Inch Nails, and they are still doing incredible music. But for this game, we wanted Andrew Holzholt back. He recently did A Medieval Dusk, Quake Champions. He did the remake of the Doom soundtrack. And then, of course, he's done music for all of our games. So it was just a natural that we wanted to bring him back. But otherwise, that's how the team came together. And for the past year, we've been working on... We almost started from scratch. Like he had some kind of like documentation about, okay, what is the world of Wrath like? What's the main premise, the main story, and so on. But we basically started from scratch, just getting all the documentation down. Okay, how many levels do we want? How do we want them to be connected? How many weapons? What should the weapons do? The enemies, how should the game feel? The lore of the game, the storyline, everything got documented. We concepted out pretty much everything that we wanted from the main game. Everything from weapons, characters. We have hundreds of pieces of beautiful concept art, basically getting an idea of, okay, what is this game going to look like? And then we started developing the levels. We started working with the textures, the models, the monsters, weapons, and so on. And then, here a year later, we are ready to announce it, which we did last Thursday. And at PAX East in just 2 weeks from now, it's going to be playable on the show floor.
Incredible.
So it's quite interesting because in many ways it echoes what was happening with ID Software back in the day, in that you had Doom, which went down the sort of the cyberpunk science fiction route, and then Quake, which was more the gothic horror fantasy route.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And this is kind of in between.
Games like that. This is a similar sort of branch here for 3D Realms, in that you've got Bombshell, Cybernetic Hero, and Wrath with the Stranger.
And it's also, Iron Maiden is a very tongue-in-cheek game with tons of humor, interactivity, one-liners, and so on, just as you'd expect from a game like Duke Nukem, while Wrath is dark horror fantasy, tons of gore, blood, a much more serious and terrifying, which is what you got with a game like Quake. So in that way, you had the typical recipe for a 3D Realms game and the typical recipe for an id Software game. And we're kind of doing both now. And whatever we're going to do next is going to be really interesting.
And both games are going to be as a Switch release as well.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So PC, PS4, Xbox, Switch. Kind of like this lineup. Okay.
And Mac and Linux. Well.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, because Linux is still a system that a lot of publishers avoid. I mean, Mac, some actually touch, but Linux is...
Well, Linux is what Steam OS is using. So if you want to use Steam OS, you need to build the game for Linux. But many of these engines, especially the old engines, were ported to Linux and Mac way back when they were also ported from PC. So doing a Linux release and Mac release is not particularly hard with these games. It's much tougher with modern games because modern games and engines are much more complex than these old engines.
So last time you mentioned that that Rad Rodgers was a challenge on the Switch because of the ability and the amount of memory you had.
Yeah.
And I guess with those two games you would have less of a problem with that when it comes to
yes and no. People would be surprised to look at a game like Iron Maiden and think that, wow, this thing is hard to get to run on a console. But this engine, was made back when CPUs had one core. They were single threaded. And nowadays, this is the main reason why we haven't gotten above, we still use processors nowadays with the same clock speed, like largely, 2 to 3 gigahertz. And now we're just getting more cores and more threads. But some of these old engines, like the build engine, is still a single-threaded engine, which means that no matter how much processing power you throw at it, or how many cores and so on, it's not going to run better. It's not going to run smoother. And the entire game is also, like back then, you didn't really have a scripting language where you have to somehow tell the game, okay, what should you do? What should the game do when you're in a level? When I do this, when I do X, Z happens, and when I do Y, C happens, and when I press the trigger, this happens. All of this info has to be scripted somehow, and all of that is scripted in the classic system for Duke 3D, which was called the Con system. Nowadays, with modern games, you have multi-threaded scripting systems that run almost at a machine level, so they're extremely fast, very, very easy to figure out, and many of them are also visual, like the Blueprint system in Unreal, for instance. And you don't have that with these old engines. So getting them to perform well on hardware like this is actually quite a challenge. Same goes with something like Quake. Quake is much better written. Like the Quake engine is much better written than the build engine. But again, it also happened later, and it's also a full 3D engine, and it's also John Carmack. He wrote a whole scripting language called Quake C, which is a branch of the C language. So Wrath is we're actually doing something completely insane, which we haven't really announced yet. We hopefully no one will notice, but the Wrath is actually a very unique case for consoles. So we can't wait to announce what we're doing with that on consoles. But it's not going to be a straight up port. It's going to be something even cooler.
Okay, interesting.
So I mean, Iron Maiden had a fantastic collector's boxed edition.
Yeah.
Are you planning anything similar for Wrath, and how do you go about choosing the goodies to go in a box like that?
So for Wrath, we have the same type of box. We developed our own press and our own tools to in a factory to actually develop these boxes. So the boxes you get from first was Rad Rodgers, now Iron Maiden, and then Wrath, are exclusive to 3D Realms. You can only get these boxes with 3D Realms games, and they're extremely high quality, exactly as we wanted them to be. For this, we're also doing a big box, and about the content, we haven't decided yet. The sky is not necessarily the limit. First of all, we have the size of the box, so it has to be able to fit within the box. But also, we want to make sure that our boxes does not exceed something like $100. The Iron Maiden Founders Edition was $100 because we don't think that a lot of people, especially for these niche type games, want to spend more on a collector's box. So we need to make sure that whatever you put in there is something that can fit and is cool enough for hardcore fans to want to get their hands off, but it's also special enough that it's not something you can, print yourself or put together yourself. So we're still brainstorming what to actually put in there. But again, we're also a bit far away from actually releasing this thing, the full thing and the box and so on. So we have some time to figure out what we want to put in the box.
Well, I have to admit, what I was a bit disappointed with the Rad Rodgers box edition back in the day was that it was only with a little slip of paper saying, as you already backed the game and you already have it in Steam, we won't put it on a physical CD.
Yeah. Well, it was in a physical version, but that was like a Super Nintendo cartridge that you had to
I know, but I was hoping for a CD. I have to.
Yeah, we actually heard that from quite a lot of people that they were hoping for to actually get a CD alongside the Super Nintendo cartridge version that has a USB stick, and that's something that we also want to do. We're already talking with vendors about it, so at some point soon we might send out like CDs or DVDs with the game on as well.
I mean, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Do you buy limited edition collector's editions yourself?
Yeah, I do. Whenever there's a game coming out that I love, I do. Like for instance, John Romero's new Sigil. I instantly got the biggest box version I could get of that. So can't wait to see that coming out here in April. That's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, that's actually another thing. Is that kind of a thing you see as a competition? because it's actually based on the same engine, I guess. Because
Well,
it's actually
Sigil
basically a level pack. If I understood
so Sigil
Sean
is
correctly.
not marketed as a new game. Sigil is marketed as a level pack, and you'll be able to download it for free. So it's not really competition. It's just John Romero. He made a new level pack for free that anyone can download. But if you want a physical copy of this free level pack, you can also buy it. It's not entirely competition, but we love stuff like that. And whenever we get a chance to work with Romero, we would also take that at any time. I know him very, very well personally, and we've been working together previously on different things. So I can't wait to play that. That's going to be super cool.
Also interesting is your choice of a publisher with 1C.
1C has primarily done military games.
Oh, was it military games?
Military games and strategy games. That's their core market basically.
Okay, and though they are expanding their market this way.
Well, so it's not exactly our choice who we want to work with as a publisher. With a game like Wrath and Iron Maiden, if you want to do a true old school release, if you want to get the game out in physical stores worldwide on the shelves, because we also want that. That's part of our old school philosophy. We don't want to make this fantastic game and then, here's the download key for the Nintendo eShop. It's the most old school thing you can possibly imagine. We wanted to go down to a store, pick it up from the shelf, and go and pay for it. Go back home, put it in your drive, and then play the game. And we can't do that as 3D Realms. We also couldn't do that back in the day. Back in the day, we worked with a range of different distributors and co-publishers like Take-Two, GT Interactive, FormGen, and so on. So we wanted to find someone for these two projects that could help us with co-publishing as well. And we pitched the game to a range of different co-publishers that we thought could be the perfect fit for this. And we had a few different options of who to work with. But for us, what was most important was that it had to be someone with a strong presence in Europe, because most of the co-publishers we worked with previously have a strong presence in the West, especially in North America. And a game like Iron Maiden and Wrath are naturally marketed towards North America. All the press that covers the game, the biggest press, IGN, GameSpot, Game Informer, and so on, Kotaku, all North American press. So North America is not really our biggest challenge. 3D Realms is a very classic American company from Texas. So, but Europe is a larger challenge for us, and Eastern Europe and Asia and so on. So we wanted to find a co-publisher who had a strong presence there, and then we wanted to find a co-publisher who knew exactly what the value was of what we were doing, and who are looking for a stronger presence in the West. And 1C, besides them having done a range of very specialized niche games, which our games also are, they're not huge AAA Call of Duty, Uncharted, and so on. These are old school hardcore shooters. So it fit really well with what they stood for. But for them, they've been doing kind of the same, but with strategy games and like World War II simulators and so on. So this was a natural thing for them to jump into, and they were a natural partner for us to jump into. They are also very hungry. They are not very well known, if known at all, in the West. We didn't know much about 1C at all. You don't really see them, for instance, in North America. So they're very hungry to get into this market as well. And to work together with 3D Realms, I think from their perspective was an opportunity to get into this market. Last but not least, during the conversations we had with them, there are a range of things that are very important to us. And that is, whenever we market our games, we develop our games, we produce everything for our games, we want it to be us who do that, because we're very, very hands-on with pretty much everything to make sure that the branding of our games are 3D Realms. It's us. It's not someone else doing everything. And they were very, very open to that. So during this whole process of announcing this game and revealing it and having people play it and talk about it, we got to do pretty much whatever we wanted, because that's how we really want it to be. Otherwise, we can't stand behind a product that we can't 100% tailor the way we want it to do. We do all of our own trailers, our own marketing material. We do our own press plans together with our PR company Stride and so on. They were really open to that, and it's been a fantastic collaboration so far. They're letting us roll with it, and that's exactly how we like it to be.
But they are not yet a big name in the retro IP publishing thing.
They are not yet. They hopefully they are after Iron Maiden and Wrath has been released.
Because with THQ Nordic, it was easy when you announced that THQ Nordic would be taking over Rad Rodgers. We saw each other even at the same day because we also had an appointment at THQ Nordic.
Yeah.
So that was kind of easy. But with 1C, well, we'll see how that ends. But of course, I hope for the best. You actually mentioned you have been hiring people from the community. Are you still trying to hire new people?
No, we have pretty much the team we need. At some point, we also have to stop. We want to bring everyone on board, everyone who's talented. But right now, the Wrath team is roughly 25 people, and they're all working in perfect sync. And we have a plan exactly when we want to deliver certain milestones internally and when certain things has to be done. And we don't want to mess that up right now. We're the perfect size, and we're doing really well as we are.
Okay, interesting.
This is an area, obviously, 3D Realms has had some problems before in terms of cancelled projects and lengthy development time. So you've really got better control over that this time.
Well, also due to the fact that right now we're working under very tight budgets. One of the main reasons 3D Realms back in the day could spend 14 years and do forever was that they could afford to spend 14 years and do forever. When you at that point they made so much money on Duke 3D, the sale of the Max Payne IP, the sale of the Prey IP, and so on, that they could pretty much do whatever they wanted to. And what's dangerous about that is when you decide as a company to say, you know what, let's just have a rough roadmap of what we want this game to be about, but let's let creativity be the main guidance for this entire project. Let's like, if we want to do something, we're just going to do it regardless of how long it's going to take, because it's going to be insanely cool. Problem with that is there's no end of insanely cool things. And at some point, you'll end up having spent 14 years creating a ton of insanely cool little things, but they have to be put together as a full functioning product. The last few years of development of Duke 3D, when it was at 3D Realms, we actually managed to get stuff in order. We got a full producer on board who basically whipped the whole team into place, hired a ton of new people to help basically fulfill that vision. So at that point, the game basically got its feature locked down. Like, okay, no more features, no more new content. Now we're going to take what we have and we're going to finish the game with it. And that happened around 2006-7-ish. Usually, you plan a game around this philosophy from the very beginning. Like when you do pre-production, the first few months of development, when you decide, before you have even touched the computer, you've written down, these are the weapons, these are the enemies, these are the levels, this is what's going to happen in each of the levels, this is what's going to happen with the characters, the monsters. Like you detail everything down. This is how much damage this enemy is going to deal with me when he's shooting from this distance. Like you type like all of these meticulous details about every single aspect of the entire game, and then you log it down, and then you start developing it. Because once you lock that down, you can start planning your tasks for every single sprint and every milestone. You know exactly how long every single little element of the game is going to take to make. And if everyone keeps their deadlines, and if we don't start feature creeping, adding new features all the time, we'll most likely make our deadlines. That's how games are made with a tight budget. Because the alternative is that if we don't make this deadline, and if we have to add more features because we came up with more cool stuff, it's going to be more expensive and we can't afford that. And then we're going to end up closing down before the game is even out.
Yeah, and it's much easier to sell a project on a sort of a fixed time scale to a publisher than it is if you
exactly.
You said, oh, this might take 5 years, it might take 7, so. Yeah.
Exactly. So Wrath itself, so far we've announced that it's going to come out early 2020. We are not gonna say when yet, and then we announced in the trailer that you'll get to taste first blood in summer this year, and that basically means you'll get to play Wrath this year. But what you'll get to play and how it's going to be put together and so on, we can't talk about yet. The first people who will be able to play the game will be at PAX East in 2 weeks, and then summer this year, everyone will be able to play Wrath. It'll be a bit more substantial than what we did with Iron Maiden, but we can't really talk about it yet. It's still to be revealed.
And Iron Maiden is not yet available on Switch either, right?
No, so Iron Maiden is just out in early access right now, a preview campaign as we call it, on Steam. Steam and the 3 Realms store and GOG.
And you have the same time schedule as with Wrath, or do you want to finish it earlier?
Not necessarily. So Wrath, the full version of Wrath is not coming out until 2020. So not exactly. But again, you will be able to play Wrath this summer.
But I meant Iron Maiden. What's your...
Yeah, so Iron Maiden is we have a release schedule called Q2, a second quarter, and we're still gonna keep that. We haven't announced the release date yet. We will save that for a special occasion.
Okay, and it will also be simultaneously on all platforms, like for Wrath.
Yes, that's the plan for Iron Maiden as well.
Okay, interesting. So where can people find out about all the 3 games that we talked this time? So Rad Rodgers, Radical Edition, Wrath, and Iron Maiden. I mean, 3 games in one interview, a lot.
Yeah, ironmaiden.com, radrodgers.com, and wrath.game.
Oh, there wasn't .com available.
No, the Wrath was taken.
Okay. And I guess you have a company homepage too?
Yeah, 3drealms.com.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's probably the best place. We have 3drealms.com, and all the 4 games we talked about are on the front page. You can just click on the boxes, and you'll be able to go straight to a subpage. And
you also have Twitter accounts for each game.
Yes, that's very simple as well. It's 3drealms. Wrath _game, and then the Iron Maiden one is called bombshell _game.
Interesting. So you are kind of reusing that.
Yeah. So the bombshell Twitter is for the bombshell character, just as Duke Nukem Twitter is for the Duke Nukem character. So we didn't necessarily want to make a new Twitter just for this one game. Just as Gearbox doesn't have a Twitter for each and every game they do. They have a Borderlands Twitter, they have a Duke Nukem Twitter, and so on. It's the same here. It's the Bombshell Twitter. Here's the Wrath Twitter. If we do a Wrath 2 or a Wrath 0.5, whatever, it's probably also going to be under the Wrath Twitter.
Interesting. Well, so thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.